He's hip. He's lame. He's hard to explain. He's the Blue Beetle. In the 1970s, the Blue Beetle had a small, rabid fan following like no other character I can think of. I would even go as far as to describe his fans at the time as a cult. The Blue Beetle didn't have his own book, and he didn't make crossover appearances. His publisher, Charlton Comics, had given up on him. In fact, from 1968 to 1981, this subscription advertisement was his only official Charlton appearance. During this 13-year span, it was the fans who kept the Blue Beetle alive. In a time before the internet, they printed fanzines, wrote fan fiction, and drew fan art. Many of these fans weren't just regular fans either. Some of them would go on to become some of the top creative names in the comic industry. The question has to be asked: what magic did the Blue Beetle possess to inspire this fandom? The Blue Beetle made his first appearance in Mystery Man Comics in 1939. He came out of the Eisner-Eiger studio, and at the request of publisher Victor Fox, the Blue Beetle was originally a copy of the Green Hornet, but after losing a lawsuit over his Superman clone, the Blue Beetle was quickly changed to not look like the Green Hornet. He was given a blue chainmail suit and a simple domino mask. His look was very similar to any number of costume superheroes in comic books at the time. The origin of the Blue Beetle is your somewhat typical Avengers story. College student Dan Garrett drops out of college to follow in the footsteps of his murdered policeman father, and as a rookie cop on the beat, he meets wise old pharmacist Dr. Franz. Franz has concocted a secret vitamin formula, and this formula gives Dan Garrett super strength. He then dons his azure-colored costume and goes out and fights crime as the Blue Beetle. And even though there were several superheroes that Fox published, the Blue Beetle was Victor Fox's number one superhero by far. He had his own radio show, a newspaper strip, and there was even Blue Beetle-sponsored events at the 1940 World's Fair. The exact details of how Charlton acquired the Blue Beetle is a story that I've never come across. My guess is that we will never know how this truly came about. So, here is my educated guess. The owners of Charlton were way too frugal to give money for the rights to the Blue Beetle, but one aspect of Charlton was that they were a budget magazine printer. I speculate that Victor Fox hired Charlton to print his comic books. When Fox declared bankruptcy, he probably owed Charlton a lot of money, and he probably used the Blue Beetle as collateral against this debt. There is a history of Victor Fox doing something like this before. He was in financial straits in the early 1940s, and he signed over control of the Blue Beetle to Holyoke Publishing as part of a court-structured payment plan. So, this is the most likely scenario for Charlton getting their hands on the Blue Beetle. The first Charlton Blue Beetle appearance happened in 1954 in the pages of Space Adventures. This publication is somewhat odd. It reprints Fox stories, but for some reason a Fox cover was redrawn along with the first page of the story. The re-rendering of the first page is done by a young artist named Dick Giordano, and we'll talk about him a little later. After his first appearance in Space Adventures, the Blue Beetle was slated for his own title. This series started in 1955. These new Blue Beetle comics had new covers, but the interiors were Fox reprints from the 1930s and 40s. And by 1950 standards, the art and stories were unsophisticated and dated. But Charlton didn't really care because comic book sales were not their game. Charlton's real money was in magazine publishing, and their owners were extremely frugal. They figured out that if they kept the printing presses running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they could dramatically cut down on the printing press maintenance cost as well as cut down on the paper and ink losses. To keep the presses rolling, Charlton added an overnight shift and began printing comic books. Actually, they didn't care what they printed as long as it kept the presses running. Any profits from comic books were a bonus. In this short 1955 run, the final 2 issues contain new stories. These were the first post-Fox stories. In these new stories, the Blue Beetle and Dan Garrett carry on where the Fox series left off with the same storyline. The new stories were produced by Ted Galindo and Ray Osrin. Both were experienced freelancers who often worked together. They collaborated a lot on the monster and romance books being published at the pre-Marvel Atlas line. The new stories didn't encourage Charlton to keep the character going, and altogether in 1955, Charlton published 4 issues. The covers to all 4 books are believed to have been penciled or inked by Dick Giordano. And again, we'll talk about Mr. Giordano here in a moment. It took almost a decade for the Blue Beetle to return, and in 1964, Charlton launched a second Blue Beetle series. This time, they did a reimagining of the character. The Blue Beetle was still Dan Garrett, but now he was an archaeologist. The writer of this story is Joe Gill, and it feels like he may have borrowed some ideas from the original Captain Marvel. On a trip to Egypt, Dan Garrett and his assistant/girlfriend Luri enter an undiscovered tomb. Garrett finds a sarcophagus that has a Blue Beetle scarab on it. He picks up the scarab and experiences a vision. He is cosmically transported through time and space to the throne room of the Good Pharaoh. The Good Pharaoh tells him that he must stop the Bad Pharaoh, and that the Blue Beetle scarab he is holding is the only thing that can defeat him. With a magic word, the Good Pharaoh transforms Garrett into the Blue Beetle. He is then sent back to the ancient tomb, just in time to find the Bad Pharaoh in the form of a mummy rising from his sarcophagus. The Blue Beetle jumps into action, saves Luri, and defeats the bandage-covered monster. During his battle with the Bad Pharaoh, we discover that the Blue Beetle's powers are super strength and flight. At the end of this story, Luri pledges her undying love to Garrett, but unfortunately for her, he is now a man with a mission, and in future stories, she is replaced with one interchangeable female character after another. Also in future issues, the Blue Beetle finds himself facing off against a colorful rogues gallery of villains. Praying Mantis Man, the Scorpion, and the Red Knight are just a few of the baddies the Blue Beetle has to take on. The idea to relaunch the Blue Beetle was originally the idea of Charlton editor Paul Mazzulli. He assigned writer Joe Gill to hammer it out. The artwork for the first story was done by Bill Fracchio and Frank McLaughlin. Because Charlton's focus was not on their comic book line, the Blue Beetle had an odd publishing schedule and a lack of continuity in their issue numbering. Altogether, they printed 10 issues over a 2.5-year period. It's hard to say if this hurt or helped to create the odd enthusiasm fans had for the Blue Beetle. During this run, Charlton dedicated 2 pages per issue to fan comments and drawings. One letter came from future Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin, praising the new Blue Beetle as the best thing to ever come from the publisher. Another published letter made a huge impact on a fan's life. A teenager named Alan Weiss thought the Blue Beetle was one of the dullest looking superheroes in all of comics, so, for a laugh, he redesigned the Blue Beetle's costume. He sent his drawing in to Charlton and then forgot about it. Many months later, Weiss picked up a copy of the Blue Beetle from a spinner rack and, to his shock, discovered that his drawing was on the Beetle Nest letter page. Publication of his drawing completely blew him away and encouraged him to study art and writing and pursue a career in comics. He would go on to have a 30-plus year career as a freelance artist and writer. During that career, he would go on to draw almost every major character in the Marvel and DC universes. Before we move on, I want to mention 2 other highlights of this run. Some of the cover artwork was done again by Dick Giordano, and the last issue of this run is written by future Marvel Editor-in-Chief Roy Thomas. Charlton editor Paul Mazzulli dropped out of the picture and was replaced by Dick Giordano. Giordano did not like overpowered mythology-based superheroes. He preferred superheroes based on science and science fiction, and when he took over Charlton, he put an end to this Blue Beetle run. Charlton already had a Superman-like character in Captain Atom. Giordano felt that what Charlton was lacking was a Batman-like character. He decided that the Blue Beetle should be Charlton's Batman. He assigned writer Gary Friedrich and comic legend Steve Ditko to the task of turning the Blue Beetle into Batman. Friedrich and Ditko had both made a name for themselves at Marvel. Friedrich had won all sorts of writing awards for his work on Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos. Friedrich had turned a somewhat typical World War II title into a masterpiece of anti-war propaganda. He did this just as the anti-Vietnam War sentiment began taking hold in the U.S. His stories focused on the hardships and the philosophical conflicts of being in war. As for Steve Ditko, he was more than an artist, he's a legend. He was a first-rate storyteller in his own right. A few years before taking on the Blue Beetle, Ditko had co-created Spider-Man and Doctor Strange with Stan Lee. Also, Ditko had worked with Lee in developing the Marvel method of creating comics, and they had perfected the Marvel method years before the creation of Spider-Man. Friedrich and Ditko had fallen out of favor at Marvel. Both had major conflicts with Stan Lee and his notoriously large ego. They found it hard to work at Marvel and began looking for work elsewhere. Ditko was working on Charlton's top superhero, Captain Atom, and the new Blue Beetle would make his debut as a secondary feature in that title. It might sound odd, but there was actually a strategy in doing this. At this time, the first comic book conventions were beginning, and artists and writers were discovering that they had fans. The Charlton staff took part in these early conventions, and my guess is that there was a lot of positive feedback around Steve Ditko. Tapping into the Ditko fanbase would make the new Blue Beetle launch a success. Since Ditko was drawing Captain Atom, it made sense to debut the new Blue Beetle there. The first new Blue Beetle story appears in Captain Atom number 83. Friedrich is credited with the script, and Ditko is credited with the concept and art. As a secondary feature, the new Blue Beetle would appear in 4 issues of Captain Atom. And in the first Blue Beetle story, he takes on a gang of bank robbers led by a thug named Killer Coke. In the first adventure, the readers get to see the Blue Beetle's airship, the Bug. Over the next 3 issues, we are introduced to more elements of the new Blue Beetle storyline. We meet his alter ego, industrialist and inventor Ted Kord. We also meet Tracy, his lab assistant/girlfriend. Most of all, we are teased with the mystery of Pago Island and the fate of the previous Blue Beetle. All of this, of course, was leading up to the launch of a new Blue Beetle title, and it came out with more fanfare and anticipation than any Charlton title ever. The first issue had the Blue Beetle fighting a criminal gang called the Squids, and readers had to wait until the second issue to find out the fate of the previous Blue Beetle. In the stories leading up to issue 2, Ted Kord had been approached a number of times by authorities looking into the disappearance of his friend Dan Garrett. Issue 2 begins with the Blue Beetle revealing his secret identity to his girlfriend Tracy. He then goes on to explain as to what happened to Dan and how he became the Blue Beetle. Ted Kord tells her it all started with his uncle Jarvis. Jarvis was a leader in the field of robotics and electronics, and Ted worked for his uncle, and at no time was he ever allowed to fully understand what he was working on. Jarvis was very secretive about his projects. One afternoon, Ted approaches the lab when there's an explosion. There's a fire and Jarvis is presumed dead. While looking through the rubble, he finds evidence that the explosion was not an accident. He also finds a film reel and clues pointing to a place called Pago Island. Kord goes to his friend Dan Garrett with the information he has found. At this time, Kord does not know that his pal is the Blue Beetle. They watch the film, and it shows robots fighting and destroying things. Ted and Dan decide that they need to investigate Pago Island further. They land on the island and are quickly captured by robots. There, they discover that Uncle Jarvis lives. Jarvis reveals his plans for building a robot army and taking over the world. In front of Ted, Dan Garrett turns into the Blue Beetle, and an epic battle between the Blue Beetle and the robot army begins. When his defeat becomes apparent, Uncle Jarvis overloads his power grid in an attempt to blow up the island. Dan Garrett as the Blue Beetle stops him, but he is mortally wounded. Ted comes to his aid, but Dan knows the end is near. He tells Ted to take the scarab and carry on as the Blue Beetle. Before he hands Ted the scarab, the underground complex explodes, and Ted is thrown across the room. The burning complex begins to collapse, and the magic scarab is lost. Ted escapes with his life. He manages to get off the island by way of a damaged boat. He washes up on the mainland shore where the cops begin asking him what happened on Pago Island. Ted tells them that he doesn't remember. Ted goes back to his workshop and uses his skills and knowledge to make good on Dan's passing of the Blue Beetle torch. Ted Kord doesn't have superpowers, but he does have the ability to build gadgets that will help him in his crusade against evil. The new Blue Beetle title only lasted for 5 issues. And in 1968, one of the worst things that could have happened to Charlton happened. DC Comics had noticed the growing Charlton line and how well it was doing. They made managing editor Dick Giordano an offer he couldn't refuse. And this was the end of Charlton's superhero run. Before Charlton could react, Giordano left, taking a number of key talent like Jim Aparo and Denny O'Neil with him. Other creators such as Gary Friedrich and Roy Thomas went on to Marvel. In a nutshell, Charlton was left without direction, and it would take Charlton some time to regroup. All of their superhero titles were canceled, and Charlton went back to focusing on other genres such as war, horror, western, and romance. The Blue Beetle was over for Charlton, but he wasn't over for the fans. They kept the Blue Beetle alive. In a time before the internet, they began forming unofficial fan clubs where they promoted fan fiction and artwork. In the mid-1970s, a group of fans began printing a fanzine called the Charlton Bullseye. This fanzine was dedicated to the Charlton characters. With the blessing of Charlton, this fanzine was given access to unpublished material, and fans contributed their own art and stories as well. And of course, the Blue Beetle was a fan favorite. Many of the contributors of the Charlton Bullseye went on to become comic pros themselves, and this includes such names as Bob Layton and John Byrne. The Charlton Bullseye, as a fanzine, only lasted for a few issues over a couple of years. But in the 1980s, as Charlton was about to call it quits, they revived the Charlton Bullseye in the more typical color comic book form. The first issue featured a team-up between the Blue Beetle and another Steve Ditko creation, The Question, and this would be the last Charlton Blue Beetle story. Just before Charlton shut off their printing press for good, they leased their superhero line to AC Comics. Now, AC Comics, or Americomics as they were known, put the Charlton superheroes into a superhero team called the Sentinels of Justice. And then they also printed an all-Blue Beetle issue. Dick Giordano, the artist who worked on the Blue Beetle way back in 1954 and later became the managing editor at Charlton Comics, became the managing editor at DC Comics. And to celebrate his new prominence, DC Comics purchased the Blue Beetle along with all of the Charlton superheroes for $30,000. DC launched a Blue Beetle series in 1986, and it lasted for 2 years. The character became integrated into the DC universe, and even there, the odd cult-like following of fans continued to grow, as he became a major character in the Justice League. To the chagrin of the Blue Beetle cult, the Charlton Blue Beetle was murdered in Countdown to Infinite Crisis, and I believe that was in 2005. Since then, the character has been completely redesigned and relaunched in the DC universe, which disheartened a lot of the old fans of the Blue Beetle. The new character borrows elements from popular Marvel characters that were missing in the DC universe. His alter ego is sort of a Hispanic Peter Parker, and his Blue Beetle armor suit is sort of a stand-in for Iron Man. The magic the Blue Beetle has on fans is still there. And like all the earlier versions of the Blue Beetle, this new character has an odd sliver of popularity. A small, loyal fan base continues to follow, some waiting for the next adventure, and perhaps others waiting for the next incarnation. Hi everyone, FizzFop here, and I have to admit it, when I was a kid, I guess I was part of the Blue Beetle cult. I didn't even know who the character was, and I was drawing pictures of him and stuff. The first time I ever saw the Blue Beetle was in the Charlton Bullseye ad from 1975. Yeah, this ad right here. I think the first time I saw this ad was around 1980, 81, something like that. And some of you old-timers might remember that they used to sell unsold comics in these plastic bag, and inside the bag there'd be 3 comic books. And in one of those bags I got some old Charlton horror books, and they had this ad in them. So that was the first time I saw the Blue Beetle. And I didn't know who the character was, and the subscription ad doesn't name him. I thought he looked really cool and interesting. I started asking around. One of my friends thought he was called the Blue Beetle, but he wasn't sure. And I eventually confirmed it by finding some Blue Beetle books at a garage sale. And let me tell you, I can remember that garage sale vividly to this day. Mom, let me have $1, please, please, please. Let me have $1, please, please. Okay, 50 cents, 50 cents. Come on, Mom, 50 cents. Yeah, it was 10 comic books for $1 is what the person was selling them for. And Mom eventually gave in, and I ended up with Blue Beetle number 1 and Blue Beetle number 3 in that mix, and I got Spider-Man 100. I'll take that deal any day of the week. I wish I could find deals like that now. Oh yeah, I still remember the garage sale to this day. I can remember every aspect of that garage and the items that were for sale. And the garage, most of all, it smelled like musk and cigarettes. It smelled totally like Winston's, if you remember what those things smelled like. But anyway, I'll digress even more while I'm laughing about it. When I was recovering from my surgeries, I was bagging and boarding my collection because I didn't really have a lot to do, and there wasn't a lot I could do. And so anyway, I was bagging and boarding my collection. I came across those 2 Blue Beetle books. And as soon as I popped them out of the bags, and again, I've bagged them and rebagged them over the years, but as soon as I opened those bags, that smell of cigarettes was still on them there. And it was like, oh my God, they just reek of it. And it's funny how like the comic book has just sort of absorbed that cigarette smell. And it sort of triggered, the aroma of all that cigarette smell just sort of triggered me back and took me back to that time and place when I was with my mom. And it was a good feeling, good memory and stuff. It's sort of funny how aromas can do that, trigger memories like that. But anyway, I digress. For whatever reason, the Charlton Blue Beetle is a real likable character, and he caught the imagination of fans at the time. A lot of these fans went on to create their own art and stories, and one of the things I also remember about the Charlton Blue Beetle was that one of the very first comic book shows I went to, they were doing a giveaway, and they'd give you like your little tchotchkes as you walked in and stuff. And one of them was a single page Blue Beetle story. It was on sort of like a thicker stock paper, but it was like legal size. And it was a Blue Beetle story where he was fighting. It was the Ditko 67 Blue Beetle fighting the Red Knight from the 64 series. And then there was another one where he was fighting like this sorcerer-looking character who sort of oddly looked a little bit like Doctor Strange, but he wasn't Doctor Strange. But anyway, people were just making these stories up, and they were printing them out and handing them out. And it was always on like a thicker paper. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it to show you. My copies were long gone 30 years ago. But anyway, I looked online to see if anyone posted one of these somewhere. Sorry, no dice. If anyone has a copy of them out there, these were given out at conventions in Northeast Ohio at some point, and back in the 1980s. And I would love to get a digital scan of one of them if you have them. So hit me up if you have a copy of one of those single-page Blue Beetle stories. The fan art, I loved it from that time period. Anyway, another thing that made the Blue Beetle really interesting back then was that no one knew who created him. The name Charles Nicholas was on all the early Blue Beetle stories, but that was a pen name, and it was used by several artists. And over time, back in the 1970s, there were several articles. I remember reading it in the old Comic Buyer's Guide newspaper or the Comic Reader. I remember there being an article about who created the Blue Beetle, and some of the names on that list included Victor Fox, the publisher. They had Will Eisner, Joe Simon, Jack Kirby, a whole list of people who possibly could have invented the Blue Beetle. But eventually they figured it out, and I'm going to save that story for the Golden Age Blue Beetle story, which might come out in the, next 5 years or so. No, actually, I'm probably going to be doing stories about the Blue Beetle and Fox Features in the next year, probably. So you'll see some videos on them coming out soon. At some point, I should say. Well, that's about it for me. Sorry about going down memory lane and rambling on about garage sale finds. But if you have an awesome garage sale find that you feel the need to brag about, leave a comment down below. And if you want to talk about the Blue Beetle, that's good too. If you like this video, please remember to give me a big thumbs up and smash the like button. It's much appreciated. So until next time, everyone, stay super. Bye.